Hey all, welcome to Seminole Canyon State Park and Historic Site. Behind me you see the beautiful canyon here and the Fate Bell Shelter and Annex, and we're going to be talking a lot about the people that lived here and called this place home. My name is Jessica Hester and I'm with the Friends of Seminole Canyon State Park group here with Texas Parks and Wildlife, and I have one of my wonderful partners here, archaeologist Jack Johnson, who we share park boundaries with here in Seminole Canyon, and actually have quite a long-standing relationship.
20 years almost now. We've been teaming up with Seminole Canyon and the National Park Service, Amistad National Recreation Area, for education programs, resource management, law enforcement, search and rescue, all that good stuff for at least the last 20 years. So it's been a wonderful partnership. So we'll be talking about all kinds of the nuts and bolts of how people made a living on this landscape thousands of years ago. So today we're going to talk about some of the plants and tools and the ways that the ancient people who lived here at Seminole Canyon and here in Val Verde County, what archaeologists call the Lower Pecos Canyon lands, how the people who lived here in ancient times not just survived, but how they thrived on this landscape. What we're standing on here, this is an earth oven. This is a cooking appliance. This is how they would have cooked important plants like sotol. And you know, you'll often see sotol in landscaping. It grows wild everywhere from San Antonio out towards Big Bend and beyond. This is my favorite plant. The zombie apocalypse happens. As long as you have sotol, you're going to be just fine. You can make anything you need from this plant. These bloom stalks you can use to make spear shafts, and you can also use them to make fire starting kits, both the spindle and the hearth board. And you turn that in that, and it gets hot and makes smoke and makes fire. And that's how you start your earth oven. We can talk more about that in a minute. But, so we've got the bloom stalk, got these long, thin, flexible leaves. They're great for making baskets and mats. The heart of the plant, the center of it, has all these leaves coming off of it. And so you would take a knife like this, archaeologists call this a sotol knife, and you would trim these leaves off, and you get this this ball, and then that would be placed in the oven, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second, and cooked for 2 or 3 days to make food. The first thing you're going to want to do to make an earth oven is you're going to use a digging stick to dig it out. So, 1,000 years ago, we don't have shovels, so you'd use a hard, dense wood, something like persimmon wood, and it'd be probably about this big around, but shorter, maybe about half as long as my walking stick here. And you'd use that to dig the pit, and then once you got your pit dug out, the next thing you need to do is heat up some rocks, because one thing about sotol is that you have to cook it, you have to steam it for 2 to 3 days to make it good to eat. And so we need to cook it in an earth oven. And the earth oven keeps the temperature high long enough that it can steam this and make it edible. And so once you've dug your hole, you put in firewood, you put in rocks over the top of the firewood, and then you light that on fire, and the rocks will get really, really hot. If you do this at night, they'll be glowing red hot. And in fact, after you've sealed up the oven, even after 2 days, the rocks will be too hot to hold in your bare hands.
So like Jack was saying, the earth oven is nice and hot and ready to go. The oven, the wood has burned down, and you could get a plant like this prickly pear cactus is what they would use here. It's readily available in the desert with the hot, dry conditions, and it is a plant that holds water. It can survive in the desert, but if you notice, it's covered in lots of spines. So when Jack builds his next part of his oven, you're going to see these pads that are actually made of foam. It's a replica of something you could handle for like a prickly pear. So the prickly pear cactus was great because it was an insulator that would keep the sotol from burning, and they would lay it down on the rocks, and it would prevent the burning of the food, and then you put it over the food. The indigenous peoples here didn't have a microwave oven where they could just go to the store and get a little pizza pocket. Instead, they could use the prickly pear cactus, and they would take it and take it, slice it open up here, and each side of this moist prickly pear would keep whatever food they put inside of it nice and warm, and as they cooked it and steamed it in the earth oven.
So after 2 or 3 days have passed, our sotol plants and lechuguilla plants that we've baked in the oven here, they're nice and steamed. Instead of being bright green, now they're kind of a smoky brown color. And we're gonna take that digging stick, we're gonna move this dirt off the top, move these prickly pear pads off the top, and pull out our food. And then once it's baked, see here, again, let's pretend that we've cut these leaves off, and you'd peel that down, and you could just eat this like that right out of the oven. It's got a lot of fibers in it, so it's not like eating artichoke leaf where you'd like that. It'd be more like a sugar cane where it's got all those fibers. You kind of chew on it from the side, get the sweet juices out, and then you'd throw away the cut leaf. And in a little bit, when we're down in Fate Bell shelter, you'll see on the floor of the shelter cut leaf bases like this that were part of somebody's lunch from 1,000 years ago that people were chewing on. Something else they could do besides eating the leaves right off the plant is that the center of this, kind of like an artichoke, you got that heart of the artichoke, you'd lay that out, you'd pound it you'd kind of mash it out flat, let it dry, and then once it was dried, you could crush it up into, you'd make flour. You'd put it in a mortar and pestle. You know, mine is portable, made of granite, but they used ones that were in the bedrock, and we'll see some of those in the canyon as well. They'd pound that into a coarse meal after it was dry, and then use a mano and metate to grind that into flour. And then once you've got your flour, you could mix that with water and then make like a little flatbread out of it and cook it down on the coals of the fire or on a stone comal.
You guys remember Jack talking about the soto plant and the many uses? Well, the soto plant is a member of the asparagus family, if you've ever had asparagus for supper at night. And that's one of the 3 main plants that the native people used here. Another one is this plant like this one right here behind me called a yucca plant. And the yucca plant produces these nice long spears. I've got some here. We're going to talk about what they could have used them for. And no, it isn't sword fighting, but they did a lot of cool things with the yucca plant. And the other kind of plant that they used is this kind of plant here that I have. It's called a lechuguilla. And when I finish what I'm talking about, Jack's going to show you a really cool trick that the native people did with the lechuguilla. Very simple, cool trick, but I won't spoil the beans. You got to keep watching. In order to get pieces of the yucca plant that they could use, they would need a sharp object, like this piece of chert. They call it a chert flake. And they would take it, and I'm not going to hurt this plant because this plant is part of the state park, and we never hurt plants in the state park. So these I actually brought from home. But they would take them and they would cut them out. Of course, you can imagine they had to be very careful because they're very pointy and they poke you. In fact, the lechuguilla has a bad reputation for poking people in the shin. And when you get poked by these, you don't stop bleeding for quite a while. They're quite an aggressive little plant. But everything out here in the desert likes to bite, poke, or sting. And so we think about our lives and things that might make us uncomfortable in our lives and think about how difficult the life might have been for the indigenous peoples. So I've got these pieces that are already cut, and I'd like to show you what we can do with them. Come on. So I've got my friend here, the soto plant. It keeps following us around everywhere we go because it's such an important plant for the native people of the Lower Pecos. So what you see here before me is I've been working hard with my muscles, and I've been smashing and smashing. What have I been smashing? Would you like to see? Well, I've got my dagger from the yucca plant. And when you take these daggers, they're very firm and very rigid because they're a plant that survives in the desert. And when you survive the desert ecosystem and the desert climate, it's so hot and dry that everything wants to protect its water. So this yucca has a nice, thick skin on its leaves here. See that? And you've got to break through that in order to get to the magic inside. And what the magic inside is, and what was so important to the native people, was the string. See, this plant is full of what you call fibers. And they could take these fibers and you could make just about anything that you needed to survive out here in the desert of the Seminole Canyon. So the fibers were really important for lots of things. One of my favorite, of course, there's another plant you get fibers from. And like I told you, Mr. Jack's going to show you a trick here in a minute. But this is the lechuguilla. And you can actually see as it grows, it's got these little markings on the edges here where the thorns kind of left their little scar on the plant as it grew. The soto does the same thing. Let me see where oh, I have my soto right here. So the soto plant has little imprints on it. See that from the thorns where it grew? And so when it has the imprints on it, always tell when a basket has been made of soto, because you can actually see the little thorn marks on the basket. And what they've done here is they've taken and they've woven the fibers together. And what it means to weave is when you take things like these pieces of the soto and you want to stick them together, and you keep layering them together, and they go back and forth until you begin to form something like a basket. Now, something important to know about the Lower Pecos people is they didn't really use pottery like you think of some Native Americans that use pottery. It wasn't really utilized here because it wasn't really part of the environment. So but they did make lots of baskets to carry things around. So you see how I began to weave those together? And if I kept going, I might be able to weave a basket, like a small basket like this one here that I wove. And you can do this if you have access to plants that you can just kind of mess around with, and you can try weaving yourself, but it's pretty fun. I've got this one here that I've smashed up the fibers, but what could I do with the fibers? See, as I pull this apart, I can get some of the strings right out of the plant. You see that? Got a nice piece of string, and it's pretty strong too. But you want to make sure you get all those little waxy bits off. I didn't do as good of a job of cleaning it. I could get my soto knife out, made of part of my soto stock here, and I could clean it off some more. And I could take this and clean it off some more and clean it off. The more you get off of it, the better, the more durable it would be and the better it would last. And so you say, well, what would they make with something like this? So let me get some more of this string here. You can make lots of things. Can you think of something you would make with string?
So one of the fun things you can do with lechuguilla, Jessica was showing all the fibers inside. So let's peel off one of these leaves. And I'll show you a neat trick. So lechuguilla has these needle-like tips on the leaves, but you can break them off and peel them down, and all those fibers, a lot of them anyway, are connected to that needle-like tip. And so we can get in here with our fingernails and pull up some of those very strong fibers. Lechuguilla has some of the strongest fibers of any of the plants in this area. And all those fibers connect to that needle-like tip. So now we have a needle and thread that's ready to go. And just like Jessica was showing, making twine from these bundles of fibers, you know, we can split these fibers into two groups and then start twisting that into twine. So behind us is Fate Bell Rock Shelter. We are in Seminole Canyon State Park. We are right in the middle of what archaeologists call the Lower Pecos Canyon lands, which goes from Del Rio on its eastern edge, say down Highway 90, over the Pecos, and then out past Langtree almost to about Dryden in the west, north to about Interstate 10, south into the Burros Mountains in Mexico on the horizon, Sleeping Lady Mountain. So it's kind of about a 60-mile diameter. If you were to put a pin in the map 2 miles west of here, where Highway 90 goes over the Pecos River, as the Pecos River itself is flowing into the Rio Grande, that's kind of the center of the Lower Pecos Canyon lands. And so we're right here in the middle, and it's a neat environment. One, this is one of the most dense concentrations of prehistoric Native American hunter-gatherer, archaic aged rock art anywhere in North America. All right, so we are at the back of Fate Bell Shelter, Seminole Canyon State Park, and behind me are some fantastic Native American pictographs that are probably several thousand years old. These are painted in the Pecos River style, and they are very carefully, intricately drawn, intricately painted. They're all different from each other. You know, this one's multicolored, this one's red, but has antlers on the head and butterfly wings. And not only are there antlers on the head, there are antlers on the ground all around this figure. Antlers there. There's at least 11 antlers around that figure. And then also standing around that figure, we have this kind of red figure with these red and yellow stripes on the chest. And then here we have this yellow figure with red feet coming up here. Several things I want to talk about here. One thing that's great is that we can see some of the hunting weapons these people would have carried. So for example, this yellow figure coming up here, if the figure is facing us, you can see there's the fingers on the hand. If it's facing us, that's the right hand. And then here, being held, is the atlat spear thrower. It has a little small small spur there on the end, which engages with a hollow knock on the end of the spear, which we call a dart. And then you'd kind of pinch it and hold it like that. So this figure is standing like that. And this weapon works as a lever that lets you throw a spear harder than you could without it. If you imagine going through the motions of throwing a spear, you go like that, and the last bit of that motion is coming from your hand, between your wrist and where you're holding it at. This acts as an extension of your arm, and now instead of going from here to here, you're going from here to there. And you can hear that swoosh that gives you a lot more force. Not only, so this figure is holding the spear thrower and spear there, and if you look at the back end of the spear, you can see those dark colored feathers, probably turkey feathers for the fletchings on the back end of the spear. It's like a giant arrow, and that make it keep straight in flight. This multicolored figure here, same thing, holding, there's so again, if the figure's facing us, we can't really see the right hand, but there's the spear thrower, and then here, there's the feathers on the back end of that spear that's coming down right there. And then in the other hand, there's the fingers on the left hand, and you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 extra spears being carried, tipped down for safety, being carried in the left hand while he's got one loaded in the right. One last thing I'll say is, these were painted very carefully, and if you look at this black line on this figure, it is razor sharp. They would have had to have used a stencil to paint that. And then you've got these red and yellow lines that come up right next to each other but don't quite touch. So these were not just slapped up there. These were very carefully composed. These are telling the stories that would have been, probably central to the culture. Kind of like the stained glass in church windows. That it's an illustration of what would have been very important beliefs to the people.
If you were a native person living thousands of years ago, right here in Fayetteville Shelter, you might have seen some of these items with the people here. So let me explain what you might have found. Now, one of the really cool things you might notice, if you look at some of the Native American artwork, you see a lot of these. It might look something like this on a figure. These are deer antlers, and these are actually sheds. They shed their antlers every year and grow new ones. And so the deer were incredibly important to the Native people because they were a very important source of food, like this jerky. They could have been able to sustain on deer meat a lot longer than some of the other things that they had to work hard for. So a deer was very special to the Native people here. Also, rabbits were an important source of food for the Native people here. And not just the food, but also they would keep, a lot of the archaeological sites have found rabbit jaws, and they think maybe they used them for tattooing the skin or other uses. They're a very sharp tool that they could use. They used all of the animal parts. Here's a piece of deer hide, and I wanted to show you this to show you how incredibly sharp these tools are. So you can see where I poked it before, but you can actually poke right through leather. That's how sharp these tips of the solto and the yucca and the lechuguilla are. So there you go. There's one of the needles like Jack was demonstrating earlier. So I've got some of that for their food sources. Also, we've talked about the mesquite beans. The mesquite is a tree that grows here in the desert, and these are the beans that they could grind down and then use it to make a masa or a flour. Another food source would have been nuts. There's some little walnut trees here and also a few pecan trees that they might have found and been able to seasonally have nuts. Of course, their life depended on what was growing in the season. Something else they may have eaten over here, I've got some persimmons, some Texas persimmons from the persimmon tree, and they're little berries that are edible. And then I'm not going to pick those up, but I've got prickly pear fruit, which are a nice sweet fruit that is still eaten today. And remember, the succession of the land has changed over time, and so there would have been probably a bit more water availability right here, and they could have been eating something like this. Now, this is actually a clam, but I wanted you to see it because it's very similar to what they would have had, like a mussel, which is a bivalve creature. And they would have eaten the contents inside there, kind of like these mussels here that we see today. Now, these that we find today on the Pecos River are called the Texas hornshell, and they're an endangered species. So they're very protected, and we're very fortunate that the A&M Institute of Resources was able to send these to us to show you today. So we have the Texas hornshell. And endangered means that it's at risk, that it could go extinct if we don't take care of it. So we've got to take care of our rivers. And then also, let's see, they definitely ate snakes, like this rattlesnake tail I have here. And if you look in the rocks here, you might see something that looks like a rattlesnake tail, but it's not. This is actually part of the fossilization that's here in the reef. We actually call this rattlesnake rock, but it's actually a bunch of different sea creatures that would have lived when this was part of the ocean right here in the desert. So we also have some other minerals that they would have used. This here is a piece of limonite, red hematite, manganese, and calcite. Are you wondering what they use these for? I'll give you a clue. They're black, red, yellow, and white. And if you look closely at the paintings, like Mr. Jack was talking about earlier, then you will see those colors because these were the colors that they used, and this is why they had them available here in their environment. So how did they get it from a rock to being paint on the wall? Well, we'll talk about that in a little while. I'm going to show you how the paint is made, but for now, I could show you, I could take part of this limonite and bust a piece of it into my little limestone. Now, they wouldn't have had a portable piece of limestone like this. It would have been part of the ground where they were sitting. It would have been part of the rock that they were sitting on. And they would make a mortar and pestle like this. But this rock, I'm going to grind it. My rock that I'm holding is actually not a piece of limestone. This is a piece of igneous rock, which is a lot harder. And it would have probably been something they could have collected in the Rio Grande that floated down from the Big Bend area or eroded down over time. And they would find these pieces and they were treasures because they would use them then to grind up the rocks like this limonite. And it doesn't take too long, but you do have to put a lot of work. And then you get a powder from that pigment. And that powder is what they used to start their paint. But one of the cool things they used was they would use the shells, like the mussel shells and the seashells that they would have here, to put the pigment in and mix it to make the paint for the walls, which was really cool.
So one of the really neat things about the dry rock shelters and caves of the Lower Pecos Canyon lands is that they protect organic artifacts, things that would normally just decompose in an open archaeological site. So archaeologists have found pieces of small cane flutes like this. Never a complete flute, but small, about the size of your pinky finger, just a little small river cane piece with holes in it would have been part of a flute. So it might have sounded something like this. We also find, sandals and mats and even things like dried human poop, which sounds gross, but is a fantastic source of information about how people lived and what they ate. So same as you dissect a owl pellet in science class, graduate students will dissect human pellets and learn about what ancient people ate.
I think it's really cool to imagine what it would have been like to live in this shelter and also appreciate the modern conveniences we have today and how hard their life would have been just surviving day to day. thank you so much for learning with us today, and we really hope you'll come out and take a hike here, come and enjoy the beautiful paintings that were left behind by the Lower Pecos people, see the artifacts that you can actually get up close and have a little piece of history that you can see for yourself. And hopefully you can come out and see, and if there's more you want to learn, there's ranching history and other great things about Seminole Canyon State Park. We have a great museum in the visitor center, and I hope you'll come and see us.